budget update. Mr. Harris.
Just a couple of items for your consideration this afternoon. We did go through this in with audit finance a few days ago and sort of had coverage with them there, but it's really a nice tie-in with the information that Ms. Walker just walked through. So as always, please stop me if you have any questions as we go through. Traditional June topics for us. First and foremost, FY24, closing that out here in just a couple of days. Your consent item tonight, so no, you have no appropriation public hearings or anything like that. Because the amounts that we're dealing with in terms of our FY24 have come way back down to sort of historical levels. It's been elevated as we went through COVID, a lot of federal money flowing through all the localities, and I'm pleased to say it's something that the Audit and Finance Committee in particular has been looking at, but we've moved through that period. So our projected surplus, Mr. Durkin's here, he and his team have been doing a lot of work to get this dialed in. We're looking somewhere plus or minus $30 million for year end for the current budget, fiscal year 24. So the question there becomes what to do with those dollars. We do have a few recommendations, again, that are embedded in that item that's on your consent tonight. Again, was discussed at Audit and Finance. First, before I get into that, because I think it's always worth noting where do the dollars come from. The heaviest contribution from a revenue perspective, I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, is on the interest rate side. We are investing in overnight, basically money market type accounts right now, north of 5%. So it's basically no risk at all. Not having to commit to any sort of long maturity to be able to access that rate. So that is far, far in excess of what we would ever budget. And so we have seen that those returns come in. That's a natural thing. And so that's really the largest contribution here. Property taxes themselves, the net of personal and real, basically a zero number. As you all know, you cut the personal property rate considerably. First time effectively we've ever done that. So that helped to offset a little bit of the overage on the real property side. So what you're looking at here is really not a traditional surplus. That's really dialed in right down to the budget number. On the expense side, it's mainly personnel. We have a lot of departments that in this job market with unemployment sitting in the mid threes, there's a high demand for workers, and so you're going to have some natural turnover. And then that's offset a little bit by some overtime costs we're still seeing in a few spots. Certainly public safety, we're working hard there, but that's always going to be a little bit of a reality. So a very normal setup on the expense side. So again, what to do with those dollars, the recommendation, as you see up on the screen, you have $5 million plus or minus on the county side for investment in one-time uses. Some uses on the school side, I'm going to walk through what those are in just a second. And then not shown on the screen, which is a policy that the board put in place when you adopted the budget, a $10 million set aside out of the 29 to achieve your first step in increasing your unassigned fund balance policy, trying to get to that 10%. It's an expensive walk to get there all in one piece, so we agree we do it 50 basis points at a time, so you're 8% now. Add another 50 basis points, $10 million is the equivalent to do that. So that gets set aside as part of this. The reappropriation action are the two boxes on the right-hand side of your screen here. On the county side, we've got just a smattering of capital projects that have some budgetary needs just from the bid environment, which I think all in all is getting better. We're seeing some of those margins come down. It's not as hot as it was even 12 months ago, but we do have some needs, some park projects, Cosby tennis courts, Mr. Carroll project that you certainly are aware of. Also embedded in there is a complete replacement of our poll book system for the registrar. That's not for this upcoming election. There's a lot of timelines you have to meet to be able to do that. But working with Ms. Vera and her team, that would be fully in place for the gubernatorial election and everything that leads up to that next year in 25. So that's a $500,000 expense, but there's quite a long runway to get there and have all the equipment they need for this fall's election, but just trying to think ahead, and that's a nice one-time use. COPS grant, this is a federal award that we got a few years ago where they cover the effective cost of adding police force over a number of years. But as you might imagine, the initial projected cost of those officers compared to what they are now with some of the increases in public safety pay, this covers the gap there. Again, just on a one-time basis. And then lastly, public safety capital, working with the police department for some watercraft enforcement vehicles, as well as defibrillators and other equipment that the fire department is looking to replace over, a 2 or 3 purchase opportunity, one now, maybe a couple next fiscal year. It is important to do those as closely as they can so that they don't have a bunch of models working their way through the system, and the training is very consistent on those very important devices. So $600,000 set aside for those two purposes. And then Mr. Holland, I know, will be excited to see this $7.5 million for land acquisition for the Dale Elementary School. Mr. Dirk and myself still have some work to do to put in financing for the construction, but in order to meet those timelines that are embedded in the school CIP, it was important to go ahead and set some money aside to look for a site. If this is more money than is needed for that, then that's fine. It just goes into our site acquisition bucket. There's no end of property that we need to fully execute the upcoming referendum and projects even beyond that. So it would just go into that general purpose if the bill is less than $7.5 million. Also includes some design money, really just trying to get a jump start on that school. So with that, I'll pause and take any questions you might have.
Questions or comments, supervisors? I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Regarding personnel costs, overtime costs, is which departments primarily, and is that expected to continue?
We have seen overtime come down as we're getting the minimum staffing in place in fire and other initiatives, but it's going to be a reality that we'll have for the next several years. Okay. But it's certainly absolutely heading in the right direction. So we feel good about that. As you know, it takes a while to recruit, train, and get those folks effectively out on the street to trim down some of those gaps. And then I think you all are familiar with some of just the one-off stuff that happens. The sheriff's, folks having to sit with an inmate in a medical facility for multiple days on end. Those bills are not something we would necessarily build into a budget, but they're things that do crop up and things we have to take care of. And the sheriff in particular does a great job of letting us know when those arise.
Thank you.
So on the school side, similar to what we just talked about, so this is their year end for 6/30. They're looking at some very, very thin margins. They're currently projecting positive surplus of $100,000. I feel confident that it will come in north of there, but they do a conservative job of forecasting. The difference here for them really is on the revenue side. Their expense totals were dialed in very tightly. They have, the teacher pay plans and the other things you've done on the compensation front in conjunction with the school board has really helped them maintain, I won't call it full employment, but about as close as you can get, for a large school system. The state revised the state sales tax number down $7+ million when, as Ms. Walker touched on, when those late-breaking state budget information came out, they cut that revision down. And again, that's not a Chesterfield phenomenon. That's a statewide pool that gets apportioned. So reflective of some, softness in consumer spending statewide. We haven't seen that here as far as the local trend, but that was late-breaking information. Fortunately, they have enough expenditure pad to be able to cover that. So they're not asking for anything as a carry forward necessarily. When we get into December, after we close the books to the audit, if $100,000 turns into $2 million, whatever it might be, that's a conversation we can have at that time. But for now, they're just basically reporting exactly what's on the screen. The one thing to note, if you go through what they took to their board and what was approved last week and what's in the packet, there's a $19.2 million carry forward. That is this all-in specific governor initiative that he put into place, I guess, sometime last year. It has to be used for specific purposes, really coming out of COVID, learning loss, literacy, all of those types of things. So the schools has 2 school years, I believe, this upcoming and the following one, to use all those funds for those specific purposes, but they're not just general revenues that they can use for whatever that they would like. So there is a request as part of this just to carry that forward and reserve it for those purposes, and then they have, again, basically 24 months to spend that down. So any questions on the schools piece?
Supervisor. Thank you. Questions, Supervisor? Comments?
Perfect.
One thing I would urge, go ahead, move forward. Go ahead and move
No,
forward.
you're good.
I would urge us to make sure we keep our eyes on maintenance costs, make sure we are setting aside appropriate funding, because I, in essence, consider, even though it's school-related, that the Board of Supervisors are responsible for maintenance of our facilities. We own those. They utilize them, but we are the owners. So I think that's a major maintenance I see you have there.
Yeah. So
2.5 million increase, so make sure our attention is there as we move forward.
Well-timed commentary, Mr. Holland. And I think if anything does materialize is from FY24 as we get into the fall, county staff is certainly relayed to them that would be our top priority for those one-time dollars.
Mr. Chair, if you remember, we as a board have asked for an assessment be done of all the schools and their properties so we can have an idea in the future, what ball fields need to be repaired, what tracks might need to be repaired, those kind of things. And so hopefully they'll look forward to seeing that report, and then we'll be able to budget for those maintenance issues in the future.
Outstanding. Excellent.
So what you're seeing on the screen here is the recommended plan approved by the school board that ties directly to what Casey was talking about from what the General Assembly ultimately put on the table. Again, it came well after our budgetary windows. We knew that was going to be the case. The good news here is they had, after they finished their board deliberations, they were looking at about a $22 or $23 million list of needs that had been identified that they wanted to pursue if the revenue materialized. So they are able to accomplish all of those things. The delta largely is things that were awarded from a revenue perspective, but that have an expense tied to them. You get the dollar, but you have to perform this or achieve this ratio for whatever it might be. So the math worked out very well in favor of the school. There's still more to do, certainly relative to the JLARC report, but it's a nice first step. I won't read all of these to you, but I will read some of the highlights. And the thing to note before we get into the specifics here is all we're doing tonight is setting a public hearing for July. So this is just presented as informational for you all, for the public. Again, we did some of this higher level detail at Audit and Finance a few days back. So we've got 30 days to put this out here, receive question and comment because the requested appropriation is in excess of 1%. So we're just setting the stage tonight. School safety officers in here, $4.2 million. They've got that program at about half the schools. So they would finish that out at the middle school level and extend to the elementary. That's had been a identified priority of the superintendent. You see some annual substitutes, high need bonuses. Annual substitutes was something I know that you all, when you were out doing your community meetings, you heard a lot about that. That's basically a substitute that lives in a building and that they have sort of a permanent fixture. They're part of that school family throughout the course of the year, and the funding for that was going away. And you saw from some of those folks in particular, and then from some of those school families, that that's a very important thing to have. So that's the highest amount on this list. Major maintenance increase, $2.5 million. The good news here, that's a recurring piece. So if they do something from year end, that's one time, that's good. But this is $2.5 million on top of the base. So that's certainly a nice step. More to do there, but glad to see the emphasis on that. Paid parental leave. This is modeling the policy exactly that we have on the county side. So they, we've tried to keep benefits as aligned as possible. So that does have an additional substitute cost effectively as you have other folks that would be eligible for that. So that's what's going on with that one. School bus replacement, again, a baseline increase in that. That'll buy you about 10 buses, but we did put some additional funds in that with the 25 budget. So starting to see some incremental ongoing investments in some of these key areas. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions you might have on this is the FY25 school lineup. Yeah.
Questions, Supervisor Ingram?
So it says here that their budget, if approved next month, would be over $1 billion.
Yes, sir.
And just for clarity, the county's budget, operating budget for next year is about 600 million, right?
Yeah, it'd be
Oh, it's
a little more than half of
More
that.
like
But
that.
once you net off the transfer, which someone would have to do.
I don't have a problem with either one of those. I just want to make sure that it's clear that school's budget is going to be over $1 billion and ours is going to be about 600 million.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
600 million, I think that's not correct, Supervisor.
It-
I think 600 million?
Net of the school transfer is
Oh,
what he's.
school transfer.
Yes, sir.
Okay, school,
Yeah.
after we transfer. Okay,
Yeah.
after we transfer, I want to make sure it's clear. Okay, very good. Thank you. Yeah, 1,023 million, with the state bringing in additional $30.1 million from the recent budget adoption.
And
Yeah.
and as again, sort of keep the the combo nature of this work session, we will have, as Casey showed you, a few dollars in the health department, figure out what to do with those attorney positions. That will be part of your July agenda as well. We will take up all of these state budget matters in fiscal 25, and we'll be discussing that with you. We're having conversation with those handful of departments. It's just a handful on the county side that benefited in any way from what the General Assembly finally approved. So we will have those conversations with you over the course of the next month. But that also will be a July topic for you all.
Thank you.
And then lastly, just reporting back on our recent bond sale. Mr. Holland, I know you know this well. I saw you in here, your hand cramped up as you worked through the stack of documents to sign the CVTA bonds. But we were successful in selling $311 million for our transportation package. They were very, very well received. Again, we were hoping to get that $300 million in orders. This is a little different transaction. Suffice to say, we had $1.5 billion in demand from the market once we went out there that day. So we're oversubscribed by 5x. And what that ultimately means is, A, the county's very well thought of. Lots of people wanted to be involved in the deal, but it drove those yields lower on those bonds because you're able to go back to those folks that are in line essentially and say, are you still interested in being in the deal if we bring the interest rate down by X percentage points? And so that was very successful. We were able to lower the cost throughout the day, even beyond what we thought we would do. So even though this is not a AAA transaction because of the type of bond that they are, our spread from where AAAs were trading that day was only about 10 basis points. So that's about as good as you can do with non-GO paper. Dr. Casey.
And this is a good time. I think Dr. Miller actually asked me yesterday what the interest rate was, and I think the true interest cost with TIC is that what you would see as the symbol was 4%. Sir.
4%.
Which again, this is not the full faith and credit or the general obligation bond series that Mr. Harris will be referring to. So for us to trade at 4% for a revenue bond issue shows that the market views even that series as, in essence, AAA rated.
And so we'll have a mark to compare that against. We are closing the CVTA transaction tomorrow, and then we will jump right into the next slug for your GO, for your referendum, mix of county and school. So we'll be doing that in July and then closing that in August. But we'll have a comparison, in relatively close proximity to see what those rates are. But 4%, we were certainly very, very happy with that. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions on any of these budget updates.